Okay, and before we get started here, I'd like to give an acknowledgement of our traditional lands. We were just chatting before the presentation, what a beautiful day it is today here. So I'm tuning in from our Rural Roads campus. So our campus, it's located on the traditional lands of the Lekwungen peoples, or the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. Again, it's a beautiful day here, and I'm deeply grateful that we can live and learn and work here on these lands. And we're the past, present, and future of Indigenous and non-Indigenous students, faculty, and staff come together. So I'm grateful to be here on these lands with you, and that you take the time to be with us here today. Okay, and we have some exciting content here for you today. So we're launching a new program, as I'm sure you know when you sign up for this session, our graduate certificate in decolonizing education systems. Here with some wonderful folks here today. Chaw-win-is, who's an assistant professor of this program. So nice to see you. Hello. Also, Dr. Willow-Samara Allen, who's an associate professor. Hello, Willow. Nice to see you as well. And Dr. Robin Mueller, who's an associate professor, program head, and school director of the School of Education and Technology. Thanks, Robin, for taking the time. Nice to see you as well. My name's Ariana Konjerski. I'm an education specialist as well here at Rural Roads University. So delighted to be joining these folks on this session. Okay, and just a brief agenda before we get going here, folks. So I'll guide us through a brief overview of the Rural Roads University experience if you're new to the organization. We have a narrative overview of program history, development, and processes. A little bit on how to apply if you're interested in applying for the program, and any questions, you can post them throughout the session, and we'll get to them as we move along here today. Okay, and I have a few statistics for you. So if you're new to Rural Roads, you don't know too much about it, we have some statistics from an alumni survey that we recently did. So 93% of our alumni at Rural Roads say that we've positively influenced their personal and professional lives. 92% say that they felt supported by staff and faculty. 90% of alumni say that Rural Roads provided them with the tools and knowledge required for a leadership role in the workplace, and 89% say that we provided them with the tools and knowledge needed to be innovative in the workplace. And a little bit about our space. So we have quite a large campus. We have a few photos here for you. We have our Hatley Castle to the top left. To the right of that, we have some gardens and green space. So there's a lovely photo of our Japanese garden that you'll see there. To the bottom left, we have a photo of our Esquimalt Lagoon. This is a migratory bird sanctuary on campus, quite beautiful, one of my personal favorite spots. And we've also been doing online and blended learning styles for almost 30 years now. Used to say 25, but now it's almost 30. So we've been doing that for a number of years here. It's a big part of who we are here at Rural Roads. And we're also proud to be a Changemaker campus by Ashoka U. So a Changemaker education, this is an innovative approach to education, and it prepares students as they address world problems, encourage others, and act for the good of all. Okay, and at this point, I will pass it off to our wonderful guests here. I'll stop sharing our screen, and they'll tell you a little bit more about our new graduate certificate. Take it away.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day, I guess, to all of you, wherever you happen to be located in the world. I'm going to start us off today. My name is Robin Mueller. Ariana, thanks for introducing me. I'm going to take a moment to situate myself here in the context of your land acknowledgement, Ariana, and also spend a little bit of time telling you about the history of the development of this program. Before I do that, though, I need to let you know that this webinar will be a little bit different than maybe what you're used to seeing in program webinars, particularly from Rural Roads University. This will be a relatively fluid and unstructured time together. And what we're attempting to do with the webinar is to mirror not only the processes that we use to develop this program, but what students can expect as part of the program as well. So to situate myself a little bit further, I am a white settler Canadian with ancestral ties to Western Europe primarily. I'm a cisgendered woman. I use she, her pronouns. I grew up in Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan. I see we have someone on the call who is from that area, on a farm just northwest of the city of Moose Jaw. And part of the colonial legacy that I negotiate is the fact that as I grew up, the Indigenous people of that region were so thoroughly erased that they seemed mythical to me as a child. My parents were farmers, and my grandparents on both maternal and paternal sides of my family were farmers as well. So another piece of that colonial legacy that I acknowledge and that I'm attempting to reconcile for myself is the fact that my family has both lived on and directly profited from stolen land for almost 100 years. Growing up, I felt like I had a really close connection with that land. I spent most of my childhood outside, feet in the dirt, face to the sky. I really felt like that place was a part of me, that it was a part of my heartbeat and who I was. But the colonial distinction there is that I also perceived that land as being mine. That land was not mine. It wasn't my dad's or my granddad's before him. It was and is Indigenous land. And now, as an adult, as I'm working on a continuous process of decolonizing my own mind, I have made a commitment to forefront as much as possible Indigenous people. That means Indigenous bodies, voices, ways of knowing, and pedagogies in both my personal life and my professional life, and to serve in solidarity as much as I can to Indigenous friends and colleagues, particularly in education systems where I work. So that brings me to a little bit of information for you about how this certificate was developed. Throughout the year 2023, I have participated in a number of workshops and symposia that were hosted by my colleague, Dr. Shawneen Pete. Shawneen is the chair of our Emerging Indigenous Scholars Circle, pardon me. And she and her colleagues were preparing a manuscript for a book called Decolonizing Educational Relationships. And in 2023, they hosted a number of workshops in order to kind of work through and finalize the content for that book. And nearing the end of 2023, they asked that I read through the book and provide a preview. And I eagerly accepted that invitation. And as I read through the book, I realized that the content provided a really compelling foundation for graduate level programming. And I started to think about it in that way. Then early January or so in 2024, I led my faculty colleagues in the School of Education and Technology here in some planning to re-envision our programming and how it might look in the future. And we realized as we were talking about that and simultaneously about how dismally Canada had fared with making progress on the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that we had an opportunity and the space to conceive of a graduate level program that would start to address issues of decolonization, particularly in education and learning systems. And so I started a number of iterative conversations with Shawneen, my colleague, as well as other colleagues in the Emerging Indigenous Scholars Circle, my colleagues in our Office of Indigenous Education, and many others. And we iteratively worked together on a proposal for this graduate certificate. The graduate certificate moved through levels of approval in our institution relatively seamlessly, but following approval, there was a time again where I was in a number of conversations with folks from across the institution, from our a recruitment and marketing team, admissions team, our registrar's office, and many, many others to discuss how our processes might start to embody a decolonial lens and shift away from structures and processes that historically had been pretty rigid at our institution. And so that required a lot of dialogue with folks to determine exactly how this programming was going to look and how we might move forward and proceed. So ultimately, the program proposal was developed with 3 courses to design. They were designed to focus on decolonizing the self, decolonizing systems, and decolonizing educational relationships. And it's important to note here that we don't conceive of decolonization as an endpoint. We're really thinking about it as a process. Our systems are forged by and deeply steeped in colonialism, and we cannot and should not make claims to whether or not you will step out of this program as a decolonized human. It's probably impossible. So that is not part of what we're promising. What we are offering here is an opportunity for people to really learn about how colonialism has impacted the systems that we operate within and how we can start adopting a more decolonial lens in our work. The courses for this program have been developed collaboratively and iteratively and take a very different pedagogical approach to what people typically find in graduate education. My colleagues, Chaw-win-is and Willow-Samara, will speak more to this in just a moment. But I need to tell you that what learners will experience in this program will be unique and deeply personalized for each individual student. So this program takes an entirely different view on curriculum and an entirely different approach to educational delivery. So I'd like you to bear that in mind as we proceed through our session this morning. And I will now invite my colleagues Chaw-win-is and Willow-Samara to join me for this conversation. These 2 brilliant individuals have really taken the lead on developing the curriculum for this program, in addition to our previous colleague, Dr. Christine Webster, who was a member of our Emerging Indigenous Scholars Circle and has sadly for us moved now to the University of Victoria. But I want to acknowledge the contribution that she has made throughout this process as well. So Chaw-win-is, Willow-Samara, can I turn things over to you?
Willow, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to the info session. So as has been noted, my name is Willow-Samara Allen. I go by she, her pronouns. I have joined the School of Education and Technology, working with these incredible folks and developing these certificate courses, in particular alongside Chaw-win-is, who I've learned so much from in doing so. And I step into this in co-developing this and eventually teaching and facilitating in this certificate, like as a white settler woman for sure, and also as an Ashkenazi Jewish woman and a member of a multiracial African family. And so what this means is really thinking about, and places me in particular lineages, and dynamics and complicities of white settler colonialism, especially at a time where invocations of, Anti-Semitism is being weaponized to cause a lot of harm and violence, obviously, both in Palestine and in people speaking up in our institutions. So what this means for the certificate, if I'll link kind of where I'm coming from and how then this is shaping the way I approach this work, is that we're really thinking about points of connection in settler colonial work, coalitions and solidarities. So we're really looking to break those binary, sometimes conceptualizations in the ways that this can be approached in terms of thinking about especially not centering kind of white settlerhood or white settler pedagogies or experiences, and looking at those intersections of how people experience systems of oppression, but also like co-resistance and life across different lands. So that's how I will open. Chaw-win-is, do you want to go?
Amazing. I am so happy to be working with these amazing, brilliant folks. And so I'm going to first start out by acknowledging Jasdeep and Dina Bandar and Melinda. Thank you so much for being here. Jasdeep, I didn't know you would show up. So there may be others of you that I have crossed paths with. I've been teaching in Victoria for 18 years. And if folks know you, you sometimes forget people. But you never forget their face. But without cameras, I can't see your face. Anyhow, there we go. Nice to see you. I'm going to introduce myself in my language first, and then I'll launch into a bit of what's brought me here as well. Bu klassisch Chaw-win-is aksap istakshith new channel thought istakshith plauquet istakshith chaklasit kayukt. My late grandfather was Chichinsanupmit and my mother's Enoch. And my obvious beige complexion comes from Ireland. And while I am super interested in all the Fenian politics that occur, I have my experience, my lived experience is grounded in being New Channel. So on this island, I share this island, Vancouver Island, with Salish and Kwakwaka'wakw folks. And it's important that I call on those long-standing relationships prior to colonization, because it reminds me when I'm working around the issue of decolonization that colonization is a blip in the memory of my people. And so one of the things that brings me towards this kind of work is it's always been ongoing, always something I'm experimenting, practicing. But lately, my friend Willow-Samara and colleague has talked about interventions, and I've thought about that quite deeply. And so one of the approaches to ongoing decolonization in my own communities is to work with folks who are willing to intervene before too much time has passed. So when Robin talks about the TRC calls to action, the province faring poorly and the federal government actually failing, it's important to know that that's on the heels of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People, which is much more of a vast document and represents the desires, needs, and hopes from Native communities across Canada. Tons of research on that. And so what also brings to me to this work are my own teachers. So I mentioned to you when I introduced myself, my grandfather. So I came to academia differently. I came to get support to ensure that the oral history of my specific family, location, and the governance structure of my community was remembered, and an ongoing educational system that pulled, my own children out of that daily experience. In fact, I'm a person who pulled my kids out of school for a period of time to ensure they would have their birthright of knowing who they are as New Channel people. And I've also over the years worked in solidarity with other communities, newcomer folks, anarchists, all people from all over going towards the same kind of goal. So, there isn't enough time in this info session to go into that. But those kinds of things influence me. So, where I'm from, we have a saying called hotoquist, which means our canoe has tipped over. And that was something older people from my community wanted to make sure those of us who were going to post-secondary or graduate school knew to be able to talk about the experience of colonization, specifically settler colonization, to understand where we're at. So New Channel people are Nas, one of the beings in the sky. Some people in English call it creator. I prefer not to. Nas is the owner of reality, and our job as New Channels people is to look squarely at reality. And so that's one of the things that I would say I personally bring towards the work that we're doing together and co-developing this course. And so, and on the path towards the returning of our canoe, which is to right size our canoe, decide what belongings as Native communities, what belongings we want to bring, culture, language, governance, health, well-being. As we move to shore, that's when the building starts. So when Robin talked in the beginning about, some of the contextualizing and being real about the work, it's ahead. This isn't a box ticking program that you can re-enter your workplace and say, I've got it. I've taught in programs where students, in fact, proclaimed taking 4 courses with me and therefore knew Indigenous communities. And that's been a source of frustration, but school is school. It's been this way for quite a while. So there's a lot of work to be done. One of the things that I really respect about working with Willow and Robin is this struggling to understand where we're at, this agreement to understand where we're at, and to still struggle through and create space for students to imagine other pathways forward. And so I would like to add that, some folks may be on here because you're already working in a K-12 or a post-secondary. You may work at an institution. My friend Dina works in a totally other organization. And so I think that one of the things we want to reiterate is that we're talking about educational systems, and we live them. We exist in them within the boxes of our homes, at our dinner tables, in our living rooms with the boxes we view all the time. And so personally, part of me, I love what Willow says about breaking the frame, because we really, more than ever, live in that reality. And so those are just a couple of things that I wanted to say, sort of a bit about to get to know me, but sort of some of the underpinning principles, goals that we've created together collectively. So thanks.
Thank you, Chaw-win-is. that provides a really good introduction actually to what learners can expect upon entering this kind of program. I have found through my conversations with folks that one of the things, well, there's two things that people are really curious about. What the courses are going to be like. So what can folks expect in terms of engaging in different kinds of learning activities, and how will that look? If it's different from what we normally do in higher education, how does it look? And the other piece that folks are really curious about is how we will assess learning. Typically in higher ed, we like to grade stuff and put final grades on people's transcripts. And we are taking a different approach with this certificate. Can I ask you both to speak to those things? And we can do that in conversation if you like.
Okay. So as Robin, as Chaw-win-is, has like beautifully mapped out a lot of the ethos. I think in what you're saying has really evoked a lot of the ethos and principles, as Chaw-win-is said, that have guided our process. So often, perhaps courses are developed, like as instructors, we may be asked to develop a course kind of on our own, and we may have a short time to do that, or we may have a long time to do it. It may not cohere from the student perspective with other courses that you have in your program, because sometimes we don't get a chance to really interact with each other as much as we would like to. And here, because we developed this so together, like in such an integrated way, students will note that the courses all interconnect. So interconnection is certainly at the core of all of this, and the learning is meant to be kind of consistent throughout and build on each other with the core principles there. And part of the ethos, and in Chaw-win-is talking about interventions and breaking the frame, is that we really want to ask people to come into this and depending on where we're at, to be thinking about our relationships to change itself, and also to be suspending the idea that these institutions will even exist as they are now, and being okay and disinvesting, from the idea that they will be. And so locating change in all different kinds of learning environments, as Chaw-win-is was speaking to. So when we think about the delivery, it is going to be online. And for us, the reason, we have pros and cons to all these learning modalities, but with this, it kind of allows here for very real-time applications in whatever learning context we are in. So as we're doing kind of these exercises, we're really asking people to be taking up work in real time in community contexts, and practicing kind of what they're learning, in the everyday, and being able to come back with a community of learners to see and experiment and move forward. With this, our assignments and our evaluation shed a grading structure. And this is so purposeful, and it may feel very jarring to some people who have felt very rewarded in the systems as they are, or have that need for that grade structure as we've been disciplined to do. But here the idea is that when we do that, we have very powerful and deep learning objectives that will guide us, and there'll be a lot of feedback and all of those things we can focus on. But the idea is then it becomes about learning that's focused on relational and intellectual rigor and affective responsibility. So it's kind of meant to be at this deeper register than just that grade. And so the idea then is we can let go of this, like getting it right, whatever that means, doing an assignment as a checkbox exercise, as Chaw-win-is said, to complete a course. Instead, here it's like, what are these different ways that you can engage with what the learning objectives are in creative ways that perhaps you haven't had the opportunity to? So students are asked, there's certainly framing of different assignments, but students have the opportunity to say, well, I want to try to do it in this way. Again, like you're not being graded. So what is most generative and possibly what needs to be asked of you depending on where you are in terms of what you want to work on in decolonizing educational systems and relationships. Um, yeah, so I'll actually stop with that. Chaw-win-is, did you want to add to any of this?
No, of course. When this is all just so awesome, Willow-Samara, and just hearing you speak about it again sort of reinvigorates how strongly I feel about a non-graded. I can say that I've experienced programs and courses where there are folks from local communities who may be, for example, a residential school survivor out of school for 30 years. And what does it mean to have them receive, a quasi okay grade in a current Western structure, which is competitive as well, in relation to a student whose family has attended Western institutions, sort of knows the game, knows how to play those things, and then they receive. So I've experienced that in my earlier years in school, and that's one of the barriers to pushing past some of these issues. And again, I guess I would reiterate, then it allows for freedom for students. In my experience, I've taught non-graded courses, particularly at a time when Indigenous education related courses were seen as the easy course. People quickly found out that the deepening engagement actually meant a different kind of effort, a different kind of paying attention. For example, adapting to the way I teach as a new channeled person has to happen rather rapidly, or you're disoriented. So students experience a disoriented state. And that is part of what we're trying to do. We're pushing against an orientation that people have been raised on for a couple hundred years in settler colonial societies. And so that's a bit more of a broad thing. Part of what you're getting from me is I'm not going to give all the details of the assignments, because part of what you need to do is show up to class and experience them. Of course, I'm hoping personally myself to bring in people that I sort of have a priority and an ethic around ensuring folks, I don't call on the exact same coastal people to be in my classes, etc. I try to make sure that there are a blend of folks who are young, old, identify as non-binary. Women are often still shut out of these conversations, and so I actively ensure that they are part of this experience, and they aren't experienced as, I guess I would say, they aren't performative. Our program isn't about giving you easy access to culture. So when we're talking about bringing a new channel pedagogy to the table, it means it requires students to do the work to get to know by being there. And so I think that's important for people to know. Yeah, so that's it for me, I think.
Thank
Oh,
you,
the
Chaw-win.
non-grade. Yeah, and the non-grading is I get, again, Willow had talked about it's unusual, it's also disorienting, but as we can't also bring ourselves to this decolonial certificate program and then not try as best as we can to operate from that same level. So not reinvigorating a Western structure of competitiveness. Like, actually, if you remove those things, what kind of community can you create? And I think one thing Willow-Samara made me think of was also that one of our hopes at the end is this community of learners will be able to go fly off after their certificate and continue to be a community of support and action going forward. I've always hoped that for my students, and sometimes I've seen it, and some beautiful things can emerge out of that kind of community making.
Thank you, Chaw-win-is. This has brought to mind and encouraged me to emphasize 3 things. So the first thing is discomfort. So learners who are interested in this certificate solely as a credential will probably be unhappy with their choice because it will require both a level of ambiguity tolerance and tolerance for discomfort on multiple levels in moving through the learning that is part of this certificate. And it may seem strange to be explicit about this in a webinar that is actually meant to recruit students, but we need to be explicit about that. The process of self-decolonization is uncomfortable. It does not feel nice, but it is something that is absolutely necessary in order to get to a place where we can move forward individually or collectively with decolonial action in our systems. The second thing I'd like to emphasize is interdisciplinarity in this graduate certificate. We have begun with decolonization in education and learning systems because we needed a place to begin. But essentially, all of the systems that we function within in contemporary modern society are colonial systems. So the contextual piece of being involved in learning or education systems, I think is somewhat helpful, but we take an explicitly interdisciplinary lens to this work. The third thing that both Willow-Samara and Chaw-win-is have mentioned is the emphasis and the forefronting of relationship as part of this learning experience. So we expect that folks will learn how to learn in relationship with one another rather than engaging in our typical transactional model of education, where there is a sage on the stage who is delivering information that learners are expected to absorb. This is the foundation, really, of our no grade philosophy, because we acknowledge that every learner will come to this certificate at a different place and having had a unique experience. And there is no conceivable way that we as instructors could assign a grade for the personal development work of doing self-decolonization. There's just no way that we could do that. So we circle back to the emphasis on relationality, building a community of learners with one another, and also modeling that in our teaching and program development practices.
Can I just add to for a few more? Is that okay, Robin?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Robin, you're making me think of a few points too that are so important that you're raising around, extending on this idea of discomfort. Really, it circles back to as well us part of the ethos of this certificate not being focused on that kind of binary, you know, or that real focus on kind of white settler pedagogies that have been kind of more, and that's a bigger discussion and happy to have it, around, you know, like centering or sort of allowing for being guided by or reacted to that kind of like especially white settler affectability, you know what I mean? And sort of everyone has to do what they need to do, but also that's not kind of the way this is structured or centered around. And so with that also, in thinking about the ungrading part is like, what becomes the question is then like what becomes possible when we shed that grading structure? Like what kinds of relationships and imagination and new like solidarities and our ways of thinking about systems and change become possible when we shed those things. So that is what we're asking people to do. And there are many people who have always been doing this work. And in fact, this will actually be like a breath of relief in certain ways, right? To not be in these disciplining kind of structures or not have to deal at the center of their learning experience, kind of white settler discomfort or those kinds of affects. I'm here to like support that work, right, in my social location, but that's not what's being centered. And then with that, to think about, as Robin said, with these relationships, we have 3 courses. And so one is focused on kind of the self, one is focused on systems, and one on relationships. But they're always about the interconnection. So we're never thinking about the self as a unitary self or a disconnected self or you know, an individualized self, but someone, you know, as all of us who are like located in, you know, a field of relations, as Jaffrey writes, to sort of think about how are we interconnected to each other? How are we kind of located always in relation to like the world, the human world, the more than human world, and all the kinds of systems. So that's what we're asking people to do. And again, there are many people and wise ways of knowing that have already been, of course, and always been doing so. Yeah. And we hope, you know, as part of the assignments too, that people bring their ways of knowing, right? And center that and their laws and protocols and languages into their work.
Yeah, it's exactly. That prompted me right there, Willow-Samara. That one of the things that's important to us when we're not centering Western education, when we're not centering those structures, or we're not trying to feed back into a capitalist industrial system that's depleting all kinds of things. We also, in that way, are creating space. So if there are Indigenous students who would like to take this program, particularly around folks who live on the island, I've worked in the area of Indigenous language revitalization. That folks who are fighting to maintain their languages are permitted to bring their language, their worldview, their practice towards their assignments. And in that way, we extend that to folks who come from other places. And it's been my experience when those doors are open, folks who come from other places, who are newcomer folks, people of color, feel more breathing room instead of asking our students to leave themselves, which is the current school structure, leave your new channel self at the door, Chaw-win-is, so you can become like them. I've never wanted to do that. And so I think that's been part of my experience. And I understand that folks in other places coming to Canada experience that differently and the narrative differently. So there's opportunity also within the community of the classroom to listen to folks who are often told to become Canadian or to become that particular kind of student. So that's actually incredibly important to both Willow-Samara and I. I really appreciate being able to make space and actually articulate that in the syllabi, in the curriculum. I also say with the caveat that I understand that there is something called the millennial scoop. There are more Indigenous community members who have been in foster care or adopted than there were in residential school, actually, currently. And so the assignment also gives a nod to folks who may not have access to their language, who may not have access to understand that whatever they bring to the table, which is lived experience, that also is important. So, yeah, we thought about all of these things very deeply and also with a lot of care and consideration.
Thank you, Chaw-win-is. We have about 5 minutes left before I need to turn things back over to Ariana. I have a question that's been sent to me directly here that I think it would be great to answer. The question says, I really appreciate the importance of developing a community through the certificate program. I was wondering, in a virtual environment, how students will be able to develop these relationships. If this program is entirely virtual, how can we still develop meaningful relationships together?
Okay. This is a question, right? I think what I can say is that a lot of us have been still doing this, have been developing relationships virtually. Some of this development work, I was just thinking about that, Chaw-win-is, is that Chaw-win-is and I, it's been so important to be together in person, absolutely, to do some of this work together. A lot of it has been done virtually, and we've been developing our relationship at the same time. I have been teaching in programs that are virtual for a long time and have watched very powerful cohorts of learners come together. And while it's not the same as being in person, that's true. Some people may physically be in the same place or may have the opportunity to do that, and they're welcome to do that. We will foster that. It's really about how we engage in the classroom and how we engage with each other, which is why sort of we're thinking about relationships, relationality at the fore. I think we've all been, in Zoom sessions that can feel very cold and strange and very awkward and transactional, or we've been in Zoom sessions that maybe feel, I don't know, like people are connecting with each other. So part of this is, and even in the admission process, is a question that we pose in that process is this something that you're interested in and you want to work on? And so when we start working on the idea of having a community of practice going forward, it's also up to that community and for us to make opportunities to build those relationships so that that's not something on the latter part, like we're thinking about that proactively. I don't know if you want to add, yeah, Chaw-win-is, if there are things you want to add.
For me, relationships are about putting in the work and the time, whether it's online or in person. And as an Indigenous person living in the body, I live in trying to wake up every day to shift the reality for me, my community, my children, my relatives who are, on the land, in the water, and in the sky. I value people who put in the time. And so it will be incumbent upon our students to make time for that. And so that's kind of breaking the frame also. The structure of school tells us how and when and all of that. And we're really trying to push against that. So what I think is I have a new channel pedagogy. Historically, students have found me fairly engaging. The classroom, I generally don't have students who don't want to be in a Zoom room with me. And so I can say I feel good about that. I feel good about sharing that time. And it isn't perfect. The reality of colonization in 2025 is that it is imperfect. And I also won't say that I've achieved some level of being decolonial. I mean, that's what I'm pushing against as well, is the fact that there's this attitude that somehow there's a beyond point. And the reality is, at this moment, we're barely providing interventions to ongoing colonization on the lands and bodies of Indigenous people and marginalized folks as well. So students have to be willing to put in the work and the time, and I trust them entirely to build and forge relationships together, because we all do that, right? We all make time for the folks we want to. And so there may be a screen intervening in that in this moment, and it's imperfect, but yeah, time.
Thank you, Chaw-win-is. I think so. So part of the reason why the decision was made to go with a virtual delivery for this particular program and others that we're associated with is that it is an access issue. So we want folks to be able to access this learning from wherever they are without having to incur the financial burden of coming face to face to campus in one of the most expensive jurisdictions in the country. So there is that piece of it. Also, I have been involved, I worked for the government of BC for a time, and I started that work during pandemic lockdown. And I worked with the same work team for a year and a half, and I did not meet those folks in person until my last day of work. And I know from that experience how profoundly beautiful the relationality as part of that work team was, despite the fact that we had only ever met one another over a screen. So not only is it possible, it can be really, really rich. So one of the things that we're committed to doing is sorting out how that relationality and that relationship building occurs really well in a virtual environment. I think we're out of time for questions. Thanks to those of you who have direct messaged me here. I also want to note that I have put my email address, robin.mueller@royalroads.ca, in the chat. I am happy to talk with you one-to-one over Zoom anytime if you have any questions about this program. Ariana, I have 5 minutes for you.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you, Chaw-win-is and Willow-Samara. That was really amazing. It always feels a little bit silly maybe to talk about our admissions requirements now after such a beautiful conversation. But I hope folks can appreciate what we're trying to do with this information, just to give the information to folks who might need it. So anywho, with that, I will continue. So for programs at Rural Roads, there's two methods of admission. So we have standard admissions and there's flexible admissions. I just want to note that these requirements, they're on our website. So please don't feel the need to like take notes or write anything down. All of this is available for you to read after the fact. So standard admissions, if you have a 4-year or comparable undergraduate degree, a minimum of 3 years of professional or volunteer experience associated with education or learning systems, and this can include paid or unpaid roles within any type of education or learning system. So that's one method of admission into this program. There's also flexible admissions. So flexible admissions is one of my personal favorite parts of talking about Rural Roads. So if you have no or some undergraduate education and significant relevant work experience, you might be eligible for flexible admission. So you'll see there's some general guidelines. So if you have no undergraduate degree, but more than 3 years or 90 credits of post-secondary education, you should have at least 4 years of relevant full-time work experience or a combination of professional and volunteer experience. Again, this can look different depending on your situation and where you're coming from. If you have 2 to 3 years, 60 to 90 credits of post-secondary education, you should have at least 6 years of relevant full-time work experience, or again, a combination of professional and volunteer. And if you have less than 2 years or 60 credits of post-secondary education, you should have at least 7 years of relevant full-time work experience, or again, a combination. I'll also mention, as I did, assessed on a case-by-case basis. So this is, again, very depending on the individual. So if you, depending on your situation, are wondering if you'd qualify, then the best bet is to always apply, and then our advisors can adjudicate on a case-by-case basis. Okay.
Mariana, can I just say as
Yes.
well that our flex admissions for this program are really flexible. We are very concerned with access and want to open up access to this learning as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robin. That's really important to note. Yeah, I appreciate you noting that. Okay, so how to apply? If you're looking at the steps here, there is an online application fee. It's about $139.43. We also ask for some supporting documentation. So if you do have things like official transcripts, a detailed resume, a personal statement, and there are prompts for applicants to respond to. Thank you for adding that, Robin. And 2 letters of reference, and those can be provided by anybody who can speak to your interest in this graduate certificate. And there's also some English language requirements listed on our website as well. Okay, and key dates. So it's coming up October 12th. I can't believe we're hardly in September, or already in September rather. So the application deadline is coming up next month in October for a start date of January 12th, 2026. So if you are, again, thinking of applying, we hope you do. Those are some dates just to consider as well. And some services that are available. So in terms of financial aid and awards, so if you're looking for any financial resources, such as loans, bursaries, scholarships, there's emergency funding and other funding. You can scroll through that on our website. There's a whole page dedicated to that. You can kind of filter depending on your situation. We also have enrollment services, our friends. I see my wonderful colleague Andrea's in the Zoom room. Hello, Andrea. They can be reached at learn.more@royalroads.ca, or if you want to give them a call, there's some phone numbers for local and toll-free for North America on the screen as well. So they can help you, again, answer any questions about your application, narrow down your options, or connect you with program heads, faculty, students, alumni, the whole thing. So they're really wonderful. Okay. And with that, that's all from me. I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Robin, Chaw-win-is, and Willow-Samara. It's so nice to be able to share the space with you.